Blessed love and peace. Another deep dive. We got maybe about an hour of decent light, daylight, natural daylight. So, see, we probably a little bit over. All type of buttery teeth, and God willing, we'll complete a decent rendering joint for this session. Today, the topic is Eurasians of Singapore. I'm having this lean to the right type of thing going on. All right, not trying to trip on it too tough though. So Singapore, and particularly Eurasians of Singapore. Just like a brief description. So in Singapore, Singapore itself is actually an island in Southeast Asia off the coast of Malaysia, amidst the confluence of islands going all the way to Polynesia, where the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Oceans meet. Large space, lots of mountains in the region too, in those islands, and further. So Singapore is right off the coast of Malaysia, as the islands begin to do their thing. Very small, and it's an island. What's this say? What's this? Actually, it's a city all itself. The island is a city, and it's a city-state. It's its own nation. That's part of the story and narrative. So Eurasians are kinfolk of mixed heritage that live in Singapore for centuries, long time established, a distinct community within Singapore, and institutions, a museum, programs throughout the year, and further. So that's who Eurasians are as a general summary. And so this is somewhat of a description of the background, the history, the culture. And again, we pride ourselves in this test run. We pride ourselves in the lack of preparation. So this is just off rip, what I know. Haven't even done any sneak research in the midst of the unfolding of this test run. We're just doing it. And we do have some multimedia today, though, because we recognize in the first joint we did some reading some excerpts, and so in subsequent joints that are recorded after that, not so much multimedia in the previous joints. So today we're bringing back the multimedia, and we have multi upon multimedia. We have both audio as well as written word. Fantastic. So what we lack in preparation, we make up for in dazzle, razzle dazzle. Anyway, Singapore. Very multicultural country itself, which is the environment that the Eurasian community, and well, we'll get into like details of it, but the Singaporean Eurasian community exists within. And what type of, like, Eurasian is a huge category of people. So we're talking predominantly of Chinese, Indian, and all particularly Sikh as well. And then from the Eurasian or the European side, it's Dutch, English, and Portuguese predominantly. So lots of different migrations and connections and relationships within that, but arriving together and bonding together as a distinct culture within Singapore, with Singapore itself having a distinct culture in Southeast Asia. Amidst all those respective communities residing in Singapore as well. So again, Singapore is a city-state, just established about 60 years ago, and one of the richest countries in the world. It went from 0 to 100 very quickly. So there's that. That's the summary. Now, to begin our joint, again, we begin with we got a stick beetle going on outside. We have an audience today. Oh, that's nice. Well, a non-aviary audience, an insect audience, just flew off Anyways, all right. And that's atypical from a stick beetle. Usually they don't flex like that too tough, or at least too quick. Continuing on. Singapore geography. I said it already. It's in Southeast Asia, right off the coast, lightweight, of Malaysia. Is there a bridge? I don't even know if there's a bridge per se. I know there's ferries. I'm trying to think of like the commute. But anyways, that's later on. That's modern. That's very modern. We're going into like prehistoric now, primordial like history. So an island right off the coast of Southeast Asia, Malaysia specifically. And like I said before, it begins the large sequence of islands: Indonesia, Bali, um, continuing all the way into Polynesia, the land of the Morai and the Wurundjeri, and further. So that would be reverse sequence: Wurundjeri, Morai, and further. Uh, so that's like the geographical location, and then we're putting it further into the historic context of migrations. We talked about before the paradigm of migration from the equator region, and particularly Alkebalan, Africa. This is one of the significant narratives of creation and migration and explanation of civilization. There are many different narratives, and so we're like India. We absorb it all and make sense of it the best we can. So, um, in this general synopsis of migration, there's a migration from India and Asia continuing eastward. There's a big bump in the middle called the Himalayas. So there's a migration northward around, circumambulating towards Siberia and Manchuria and China. And then there's the way through the Indus Valley, through India proper, and then continuing on to the eastern part of the continent, where there exists today Thailand and Cambodia and Vietnam and further. This is the vicinity Malaysia, and this is the vicinity of Singapore. So, kinfolk it is generally understood, and again, there's a number of different explanations, but it's generally understood. People migrate from parts of Asia into the peninsula of Southeast Asia, and then continue on further into the islands, and again, Singapore being one of these, and continuing to all those islands that I mentioned in sequence: Indonesia, the land of the Wurundjeri, the Morai, all the way into the Pacific Islands. And there's described a continuing migration, like back and forth after reaching out into the islands, into the distance. So that's some of the long time history of Singapore. And that being said, again, it's comparatively remote, and um, there's modest amount of habitation for a duration, and to give some folktale context to this ambiguity, we're going to share one of our first multimedia gifts or presentations. This is actually, again, it's a very brief folktale that describes the beginning of Singapore. Singapore itself, meaning Lion City, Sing, coming from Desi. So here's the folktale. This is provided by a website called Asian Folktales. So this is actually gleaned from previous work that we do in terms of accumulating stories from different traditions. So that being said, here's the brief folk tale about the beginnings of Singapore. It is said that long, long ago, a prince in Palembang called Sang Nila Utama was bored. He decided to go hunting with his men. In the woods they saw a deer, but as he tried to shoot it, it moved swiftly. The prince and his men followed, trying to catch it. The deer disappeared, but from the hill where it had led them, the prince had a beneficial view of the surrounding islands. Looking out into the distance, Songnila Utama saw an island that he had not seen before. It had sands that shimmered white on the beach. "What is that island?" he asked his men. "Tamasik," they answered. "Let us go there," said the prince. As they sailed towards Tamasik, however, a storm arose. The wind blew hard and the waves rose higher and higher. The boat was battered and in danger of capsizing. To lighten the load and help keep it afloat, Songnila Utama's men began throwing overboard the cargo they carried, but still the storm grew fiercer. They tried throwing everything that they could possibly manage without. They knew their lives were further important. However, the boat continued to sink. One of his trusted advisors said to Songnila Utama, "Throw your crown overboard. It is the heaviest thing left on board." Perhaps the advisor had remembered an old story that said that Songnila Utama was one of the descendants of the Sea King's daughter. When the prince threw his crown overboard, the storm abated and the seas were calmed once again. So they continued their journey. When Songnila Utama and his men landed on the shores of Tamasik, he said he caught sight of another animal, one that he had never seen before. It was magnificent, with a black head, a white neck, and a red body. It looked deep into the prince's eyes, then it disappeared from view. Songnila Utama liked what he saw of the island. It was time he had his own place to rule, and he thought the sighting of the Singha was an auspicious sign. "This is where I shall live," he said. "We shall call this place Singapura, or Lion City." And that, they say, is how Singapore got its name. So that's part of the folklore, as the historic narrative of Singapore. So amidst, again, the comparative modesty of details concerning the ancient history of Singapore, we're going to fast forward into the visitor stage, where at some point, a number of centuries ago, Singapore becomes a very advantageous location, strategic location for shipping and military as well. It's right, as I mentioned before, it's right at the junction between the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. So through the years before that, through the generations, centuries before that, people were traveling from India, even from Arabia, even from Africa, going all the way past India, past Southeast Asia, particularly with interest of China initially, but also finding these other locations in the Pacific Islands as well. So Singapore becomes a strategic location between India and China, right in the middle between the two. Very, very advantageous. And so that's established for a long time just within the immediate region between India and Asia. And then when Europe comes poking along and say, "Oh, I want to say, they're specific names, and I could just like throw out ones that occur to me, but I don't know if it's necessarily the right sequence or actually appropriate, right? The ones who actually do it, but I won't do it then. How about that? That's one model protocol when like doing exams or whatever in our educational methodology. Rather than guessing, don't guess. Don't give a wrong answer, because a wrong answer gets a negative point. A blank just gets 0. So that's a methodology just for in diplomacy. Rather than guessing and being wrong, don't say it. Now, sometimes we can say, if it's appropriate, whatever, just give the very explicit disclaimer, uncertain about this. So anyways, that's a side note. Continuing on, a number of different those explorers that could go from, again, like Portugal, and the Netherlands, and otherwise, make it all the way beyond India and keep on going. And then, Marco Polo already established the Silk Road. Oh, no, I shouldn't say that. The Silk Road is already established. Marco Polo travels along the Silk Road. Chains in the brain. And then, so people already know there's already trade going on from China all the way to Europe. And so once people begin circumnavigating Africa from Europe, eventually arriving in India, that would be after Columbus and otherwise had landed in the other direction. Then it's like, oh, okay, keep on going, and then here's another way to get to China. And again, when having by this point big boats with big sails, it becomes further economical, even though it might be longer. Actually, it may not actually be longer. Um, in terms of duration, the length is definitely longer. Compared to walking on land compared to going by sea. To go on land, it's somewhat further direct just to go around Asia through all the mountains initially, but there's all different types of dangers and costs and like heavy loads to bear. Animals got to do the carrying and further. So that compared to boats, loading up a boat, putting up some sails, and heading all the way around. There was no Suez Canal at that point, so heading all the way around Africa, and then making stops along the way, and then going continuing on to India, and to China and Singapore again being an advantageous strategic location on that route. And then all the different, again, all the local regional trade going on already for hundreds of years. Singapore becomes further advantageous, and it becomes again a further interest of strategic military location as well for the amassing of navies, navy shipyards, and additionally. So there's a lot of the so-called superpowers, and not obviously not just Europe, but Japan, China as well, having an interest in the strategic locations and methodologies of administration for the passageways of these places. So, because there's taxes and taxes and taxes in all these transportation facilitations. So, it becomes an increasingly coveted location. And gradually, Europeans become increasingly prominent. China is prominent in the region as well as within Singapore. And again, this is again without the notes, without the research. This is coming from a very Western kind of bias and perspective, even involuntarily. Just this because this is what I have available. So the basic like history, like the specific history, is kind of contextualized within the colonial history. The different parts of Europe making different claims concerning Singapore. Like I said, specifically the Dutch and the Portuguese, as I recall most, um, if I as I call most readily, um, and then eventually the English, and again, China and Japan continually involved amidst the arrivals of the Europeans, and additionally, but there are already being different contentions in other places between Europe and Asia in that respect during the course of that period. So during this time, again, Singapore is increasingly established as a port city and a strategic location for commerce and military, as well as once being a place of commerce and trade, then it becomes a place of banking and finance, and it cultivates a culture of these types of services, people being educated and being known and renowned for these skills, for these services that don't require agriculture, don't require a lot of land, because it's an island, it's a city, and so it's a strategic location for harboring shipping vessels, and then with those arrivals of the ship vessels, then there's commerce, trade, finance, and otherwise. So there are all these occupations that are established, these vocations that are established, and a reputation for efficacy accordingly. So that's part of the history and the legacy and the continuing culture of Singapore today. So a number of different kinfolk arrive in Singapore, settle down, merchants and other kinfolk from India, from China, Malaysia. It's right there. And if we're in honor of the indigenous people in this narrative, and it is recognized that the kinfolk who are the most indigenous to Singapore are the Malay kinfolk. Um, and so, amidst all these names I'm popping out there, Malay and Malaysia, because Singapore is right off the coast of Malaysia. So, that is the indigenousness of Singapore, and a prominent foundation within the culture of Singapore as well. So, to provide due respect accordingly. So there's the indigeneity of Malay. There's arrival of kinfolk from India. There's arrival of kinfolk from China, as well as from Japan, considerably, as well as other places around Asia. There's arrival eventually of kinfolk from Europe, Portugal, Deutschland, not Deutschland, Portugal, the Netherlands, or Holland, or the Dutch, and also England, Britain. And Britain becomes the most predominant in the latter 2 centuries or thereabouts, with its activity in India and other places. And so during that time, with all these people arriving on this island, all these different cultures arriving, there are marriages. There are people who marry each other. Again, all different types of Eurasian mixes of each of these categories: Chinese, Indian, Malay, Portugal, Dutch, British, and otherwise. Some of it long time established, 400 or 500 years ago. Some of it newly established. There are waves with occurrences of global happenings that affects migration, and so there are periods throughout history where there are increasing waves that come from different locations, and then again further marriages, and that kind of gets further infused into a distinct culture and community within Singapore itself. So that brings us up to about this past century. And before I go into like the further detailed history about the past century, just give a basic like kind of synopsis of like the culture of Singapore. Do I do this now? I'll hold off. I'll hold off on this. We'll try to like leave this off, or lead off with this, because it's somewhat of the positive light stuff. So we'll try to save that for the end, God willing. Continuing on, this past century. So it becomes increasingly contentious as one just looks at like world history, the world wars, the significant increase of migration and mobility of large populations of people, and there's locally, there's, in terms of like the regional politics, the regional geopolitics, there's a considerable Singapore becomes kind of like I won't say a pawn, but like a middle kind of coveted land or coveted island between the competition between Japan and China, and that significantly factors into the ethnic politics within Singapore as well. There is a time when, particularly about a century ago, when Japan predominantly, back up a little bit, predominantly the population is Chinese, and so much of the norms, much of the culture is established and Chinese prominent. So that is established amidst all the migrations and everything else. Malay is also prominent, but Chinese is rather prominent as an administrative authority kind of cultural experience. So again, particularly about a century ago, amidst the buildup of the Second World War, Japan I won't say conquer, but Japan invades Singapore, and the words here are charged, so I'm not trying to be too like biased or whatever, but Japan militarily seizes Singapore, and there's a lot of hostility concerning this, and additionally, and so Japan occupies Singapore for a duration, probably a number of years, and there's harshness, harsh experiences, and additionally, the details of it, again, I would have to refresh my memory. But there's hard treatment towards locals, and then there's harsh resentment towards the Japanese accordingly. Um, Eventually, again, as is the case in a number of places around the world, Britain comes. Again, the history here is a little bit iffy, so I have to like work on the sequence. But eventually, Britain becomes, amidst its continuing colonial presence before that, um, there's an eventuality of Britain interceding. And during the course of the Second World War, Japan formally leaves Singapore. Um, so whether Singapore becomes a protectorate of the British Crown, that I'm precluded from stating um, absolutely, or stating uh, affirmationally, just like there's still a lack of certainty concerning that actuality. But there is some type of arrangement in that respect. Um, so after the Second World War, there's somewhat of an ambiguous period concerning Singapore. It's very multicultural. There's large populations of people from Europe still at that time residing in Singapore, and again the Eurasian community as well, the Chinese kinfolk, Indian kinfolk, Sikh kinfolk, and further. So, and it's a very distinct, because of that, it's a very distinct society from the surrounding areas. It's distinct from Indonesia, which is predominantly Muslim at that point. It's distinct from the mainland of Malaysia, which is also predominantly Muslim. It's distinct even from Thailand and Vietnam and Cambodia, which are predominantly Buddhist. Singapore is a combination of these. There's a large population of Muslims. There's a large population of Buddhists. There's a large population of Dao practicing Chinese kinfolk. There's a large population of Christian. There's a Jewish community. There's a large population of Sikh. There's a large population of Hindu. So it's a very pluralistic demographically society. That was a way beautiful correction of improper grammar. Um, Demographically, it is a very pluralistic society. Um, Please hold applause till the end of the presentation. So that's the culture and how it's very distinct from the surrounding area, particularly 70 years ago thereabouts. And so when there is this flux of political sovereignty concerning Singapore, that it was not Britain was letting go of its colonial ways, so it's not continuing as a British colony. And then again, Japan was just removed, so it's not continuing as a Japanese extension. There's emerging concerns about the East-West situation in terms of communism and capitalism, and so for it to be outright claimed by China would be somewhat choppy waters in the geopolitical ocean. So there was an interest of how to but at the same time, Singapore is doing things, and so there's a very strong interest of it being stable and secure, because it has the know-how and is providing services for all these other giants of civilization or of convention, contemporarily speaking. One attempt is made for Singapore to join with Malaysia as like a distinct entity of Malaysia, and that is short-lived. It's just very difficult because the culture of Singapore is very different from Malaysia. Malaysia is, like as I mentioned, predominantly Muslim, has a different culture, different norms in terms of um, uh, just culture and customs and lifestyle. So a lot of the things that are tolerated in Singapore are less of a thing within Islam. So as an official thing. So, anyways, that's just one of the that's one of the distinctions. There's still strong congruence between Singapore and Malaysia as well, but that was less feasible. That was observed as less feasible. So then, the um, the decision is made for Singapore to establish itself as its own nation. And again, it's just an island. It's a small island. Um, it's a city. It's not even like a full island per se. It's a city. Um, it's a city-state island. So I mean, maybe not necessarily like Vatican City, but maybe like a Rome. If you think of like the size of like the extending area of metropolitan Roma, but that being an island, that's Singapore, perhaps. Well, one can look up the specific measurements. However, anyways, that's the general picture. So, um, but that does not stop it from becoming its own nation, its own sovereignty, a full-fledged member of the United Nations, a nation amongst the nations. So that is, as Singapore is established as an independent nation, um, like I said, about 60 years ago. And the first president of Singapore is of Chinese heritage, and becomes a legendary hero of Singapore because he leads Singapore from that experience of flux, of like ambiguity, of being like in the tug of war between all these different entities, into establishing itself as an independent sovereignty, as a distinct culture, with all the different groups that live within Singapore, focusing on a plan of quote unquote what they like to call development. Not they being Singapore, but the World Convention. Um, and he's able to motivate. He's able to motivate the populace, and maintain order. Singapore is known for being very strict in terms of law enforcement. I remember growing up in the 80s and 90s. There's the story of a boy who was caught. I think it was either doing graffiti or something like that, and got a thrashing, because that was the penalty. So it was like hard corporal punishment for things in the United States that would, well, depending on who people are, would be kind of like whatever, continue going on. But like I think no chewing gum, stuff like that. So, but meanwhile, the streets are safe, comparatively speaking. It's clean. So, hey, each one gotta find different, well, not different strokes for different folks. To each his own. Um, that is the most appropriate one. Different strokes for different folks. But anyways, I'm just gonna like, Heisman that joint. All right. Um, so the president establishes this stability within the society, and encourages kinfolk to be productive to the point that, like I said before, Singapore begins as a non-entity in the world scene in terms of being an independent sovereignty, and then within just a few generations, establishes one of the largest GDPs in the world, like one of the top 10 investors internationally, even within the United States. So I mean, like it's comparable to Switzerland. One could say Switzerland is comparable to Singapore, because that's how like balling Singapore is at this point within the recent generations. And again, the major industries, at least in recent history, is finance, um, and I mean shipping and otherwise. But a lot, I mean, tech is also big in Singapore. So those things that those vocations and occupations that are world influential without requiring a lot of land. Singapore, that's it. Uh, and So Singapore has a very high standard of living. Things are very expensive in Singapore. Land, retail, real, um, residence and places to stay, very expensive, very condensed, like living in Tokyo. And otherwise, I have yet to walk in Tokyo in this life, on this earth, in this temporal realm. However, from what I understand, it's similar in terms of like the compactness. Um, However, there's also very strong social programs in terms of education, health, and otherwise. So there is an underclass, and there are ethnic, essential like soft weight, lightweight, soft apartheid within Singapore. Again, Chinese is the predominant ethnic community, particularly within the hierarchies of society. Um, and many of the people speak either Mandarin or another dialect of Chinese. Uh, the official language, I think, is actually English, and so that's like the common language amongst kinfolk. And each of the other communities speak each one's own language predominantly still. I mean, continuing on and retains a lot of its each one's own particular culture. India and the different languages from India, Arabic, Eurasian, European languages. English is like the go-to joint. Um, so that's a lot of the back, a lot of like the general gist. And Singapore is doing its own thing. Like when reading the Constitution of the Singapore, like what the requirements are of the president. I think it's actually like no cap, literally. A presidential candidate has to be a millionaire. Serious. Like a presidential candidate has to like have like be a baller. And one of the reasons and the logic behind that is that they have to have own a business or have money and do things for a certain period of years to show that they have the skill set, the acumen to be an administrator and to run a business like running a government. So it's not just a popular politician who's very favorable amongst people but has no skills in like running this fine crafted machine of Singaporean government. So like just plain no non-apologetic kind of things like that, like yo, this is how it is. There's a lot of again, a lot of investment, a lot of relations with the government of China, um, and there is a lot of private entities that are established through the public domain of the Singaporean government. So the lines are at least the pretenses of lines that might be found in places like in Europe or the United States, where these are hard fast no, you can't do this, and that's improper church and state or private public um, boxes or whatever. It seems less applicable or done in a different way. In those boxes and lines in Europe, let's stay away from the commentary, but it's a different way of those nuances. I'll just put it that way. Um, but there is a very strong direct interaction and relationship between the government and private entities, businesses, and ventures. And additionally, Singapore provides consultation to other island countries, particularly within the Caribbean, and additionally about cultivating economics, how to answer infrastructure situations and challenges as an island community. Um, and so it provides ongoing consultation with kinfolk around the world regarding these unique kind of skill sets and challenges and solutions. When I begin my formal studies in pluralism and mixed heritage and interfaith, and additionally, I am immediately drawn. One of the things I do, again, this is over 20 years ago, and there's not a lot of information on the internet available on this. And so, amidst the material I am able to find, one of the first things I do is look up, like in just like general registries, like look up societies, nations that have the most pluralistic populations, meaning that at least three prominent populations of people of different ethnicities. So rather than just having like a binary of like 80% and 20%, or 80 and 10 and 1 like where actually one specific characteristic is what nations exist where there's an absence of any one specific ethnic community comprising the majority of the population. So wherever the nation is, any one ethnic group is not greater than 50% of the entire population. What nations are there on this world, on this earth, that have that qualification? Not many, at least 20 years ago when I look at it. And so the two that I find most prominent, there are a lot that kind of like blur the the lines of that question, like Brazil, pretty much like the Western Hemisphere. But around the world, other than the Western Hemisphere, pretty much the only two countries, the two that come to mind that I recall, are Singapore and Mauritius. So the two ends of the Indian Ocean. Singapore being on the coast of Southeast Asia, and Mauritius being off in the cut of Southeast Africa. And both similar mixes in terms of Indian, Chinese. Mauritius has somewhat further African, but Indian, Chinese, European, and otherwise. So interesting, that phenomenon, but it's very logical because Mauritius is also on that route amidst the Indian Ocean, Arab as well. So, but it's a unique phenomenon where there's an absence, at least from what I recall 20 years ago, there's an absence of any one particular ethnic group having further than 50% of the population. And that requires that the society itself has some type of skill set to interact with each other. And that even, particularly in the pretenses of a democracy, with notions of majority populations and whatever else as a premise for political influence, there's the necessity of coalition building, not just in terms of like, oh, here's our token, we'll give you some attention at this moment, but like, yo, let's try to do something. And so that's something that is interesting that I find about Singapore, just from looking at the mathematics, just from looking at the numbers, the demographics, and when I become further involved in the interfaith movement, I find there's the interreligious organization in Singapore as well, that includes representatives of clergy and lay leaders from the different religious communities within Singapore. Again, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Muslim, Christian, and Sikh, Tao, those being the predominant religious communities, and each one having an established, formidable local community within Singapore as well. And again, retention of language, retention of rituals and practices. So part of the experience, from what I observe within Singapore, is in the it's not necessarily a melting pot situation or a mixed salad situation. It could be called rojak. That's one of the national dishes of Singapore, which is a mixed salad that people mix together as part of that symbol of working together. And so in that rojak of religiosity in Singapore, there is a vibrance. Each one retains a vibrance and authenticity within each one's own tradition as well, continuing to visit with the original lands and otherwise. So it's other than just like a rote assimilationist kind of paradigm as it can be found in many respects further west in Europe, and particularly within the United States. Less of this onus and expectation and imposition of assimilating into kind of like an ambiguity type of situation. So that's one thing. Now, again, that might be the grass being greener, but that's what is observed. And that is what observed in the conditions surrounding the Eurasian community. So the Eurasian community within Singapore has a distinct culture of its own with distinct practices. It is actually tends to be, or what we observe is and witness is that there is a very strong European influence within the Eurasian community, and it's one of the ways of being distinct or perhaps distinguishing itself, which is two different things. from the either any one particular ethnic group within Singapore, or just an ambiguous kind of experience of multiculturalism within Singapore. So there's a specificity within the culture and tradition, customs and history of the Eurasians within Singapore, the Eurasian society. There are two basic groups, main groups within two prominent Eurasian groups within Singapore. One is called Eurasian Society of Singapore, and I think the other one is called Singaporean Eurasians. What the actual distinction is between the two groups, I'm less inclined to speak to that at this moment. I am aware that there are those two different groups, and it's been that way for a while. The two having, I don't know, I'm uncertain what the confluence is in terms of interaction and membership between the two different groups. And there does seem to be somewhat of a cultural distinction even amongst the two groups. So some of the distinct cultural practices within the Singaporean Eurasian community at large in general is observance of Christmas. That tends to be a unifying, fun, comparatively accessible cultural celebration, and the celebration is a considerably Portuguese style celebration. A lot of the religiosity innate within the Eurasian community in Singapore seems to draw considerably from the Catholic culture and practice, particularly from the Portuguese element. So, how each European culture or constituency within the aggregate influences the specific practices within the culture, we're still learning on this side. But that's what we observe. There's actual dance within Eurasian culture in Singapore, and I think it's called the Jingli. So it's like a line dance. It's like a square dance, and the garb that is worn is very much influenced from Portuguese culture, and one of the things that is observed is how again, when as distinguishing itself from either a straight up Chinese culture or Chinese community or straight up Indian community or otherwise, is the distinct experience of being of European heritage. And so that's something, again, it's an ethnic experience that has parlance or has some kind of like, has some parlaying capability in terms of economics and politics within a predominantly East Asian region and East Asian community. So it's a matter of saying, oh, you want to do business here, or you're trying to find out some information here, or whatever. The Eurasian community has a certain chip or whatever in those type of very pragmatic, conventional competitions or leverages or otherwise. And some ways, well, I mean, there's straight up European kinfolk who live in Singapore as well, and so if people just want to do business with Europeans, people could just go to Europeans. However, there are nuances about, again, being mixed and this and the other. Many Eurasian kinfolk have multilinguist skills, and that is a significant factor in terms of strengths of relationship with the respective communities involved. And they're all different types of mixes. And again, class factors into the different ethnicities as well. So I mentioned Malay being indigenous to Singapore. And in honesty, Malay is essentially treated like a lower class. The Han Chinese is essentially like the hierarchy of society. Europeans are kind of like the honored guests. And then, I mean, maybe, I don't want to like just be very rote or whatever, but just giving people a general idea. Then Indian, Asian, um, and then Malay, and that being like the general, like societal order or whatever, quote unquote, so to speak. Now, obviously, so that translates to jobs, that translates to education, that translates to income, that translates to the socioeconomic differentiation within society. And again, it's very high, and it gets very low. The very low still has a lot of social programs made available. However, there is a drastic differentiation within the lifestyles, in addition, and that often plays out along the lines of ethnicity, as is just the nature of life and civilization. The mixed heritage Eurasians, again, with Europeans being the honored guests, Eurasians kind of parlay that middle position um, of like establishing a distinct niche within society, ongoing for generations, and taking on a lot of the political. Uh, I don't, the political um, uh, tropes of the higher socioeconomic class. So, in the delicate rhetoric when referring to kinfolk of the lower socioeconomic stratosphere. Now that being said, um, well, so that's what is observed. And again, there are institutions. There are Eurasian institutions. There's a museum, and there are other cultural institutions and establishment within conventional society, offices and otherwise. So there's a strong relationship between the Eurasian community and the conventional leadership within Singapore, um, and continuing to maintain its distinction, and thrivingness. Uh, I'm observing myself as I'm doing this, and I'm recognizing that, distinct from other joints, one of the differences of this joint today is that I abstain from giving like a linear biography that's helpful to get a sense of the life experience. And again, that's attributable to my knowledge at the moment. Um, and so I'm sharing some of the stuff that I do know. So it might be less like engaging or otherwise. However, um, we got dazzling still. We still have some razzle dazzle. Um, so, what else? What else? What else? What else? Oh, so it's also beneficial to recognize that quote unquote Eurasians is not the only type of mixed heritage experience within Singapore. Haha, how about that? Because to be honest, I'm uncertain what like the gatekeeping policy is for Eurasians specifically. Um, uh, Generally speaking, it tends to, from what I observe, it tends to be again Dutch, British, and Portuguese on one side of the Euro side, and then predominantly Chinese, and perhaps maybe some Sikh or otherwise. And I'm uncertain like how those politics officially or unofficially, directly or tacitly factor in to who is considered Eurasian and who is not. Whether if somebody's of Indian ancestry, but then of um, African ancestry, how does that factor in? Oh, that's I don't know about the European side. I'm my knowledge is comparatively modest concerning that. So, but there is a distinct culture. It is established within like in relationship with the hierarchy of society. So, and because of that, it tends to be further guarding in terms of who is let in, because even just people who say the wrong thing or rock the boat a little bit, that has adverse implications in terms of those relationships within the hierarchy. So I say that because one particular mix or one category demographic that is very relevant and that is very like does call things into question is the Malay kinfolk. When kinfolk are mixed with Malay and otherwise, how that factors into acceptance as a Eurasian, specifically, because again, just as the cases within colonial history around the world, the indigenous kinfolk tend to be considered as with less respect and otherwise, and it being very quiet and very significant. So, um, for Eurasians to include mixed heritage Malay within the mix um, poses implications in terms of the Eurasian community as a whole being as readily accepted within the hierarchy of Singaporean civilization. So this is commentary rather than necessarily details and information, but I'm trying to portray some of the experience within the culture and otherwise, and kind of like making up for the names and numbers that are absent from this deposition. So, all right. Before we get into the razzle dazzle, I already mentioned Rojak. That's one of I learned about Rojak many years ago. We even established our form of our own Cuyahoga, Ohio version of Rojak here. That includes beans, black beans, and rice, basmati rice particularly, yams, and corn, and some additional ingredients, curry, tofu as well. So, anyways, that's another story. It's been a while since I had some of that Rojak. It's not that bad actually. Ha 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 ha. I'll share this one thing. This is like off topic, but it's still on topic. I share the Rojak with kinfolk, dear beautiful kinfolk, who are actually Baha'i. There's a Baha'i community in Singapore as well, and within it's a beautiful family, and I'm being the host, albeit in a place that's not my place. So, like in the preparations, I have a lot of quote unquote excuses, but it wasn't properly shared. It wasn't properly hosted, I should say. It wasn't properly provided. So, made the best of do. But it was a Shabbat dinner of all things, and the challah didn't get fully baked and everything else like that. And I'm hurrying to complete it. It's already past candlelighting time. And that's a whole nother situation. But anyways, point is, like, at some point, we had like a deconstructed Rojak. Like all the different ingredients for the Rojak are provided in different bowls, because like it takes steps to get to acclimated to our style of Rojak. So anyways, one of the sistren, the nieces, young sistren, very, very beautiful and polite, just very respectfully asks me about one of the ingredients. And asks if it's a carrot, because it's orange and it's crunchy. And I say, oh no, that's a sweet potato. It just hasn't been cooked all the way. Ha 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 ha. Anyways, classic. Anyway, all right, that's it. But that was inspired by Singaporean multiculturalism and the Rojak culture. So practice. Oh, such patience too from the kinfolk too. Beautiful patience for it all. So, and we actually had a beautiful dinner, conversation and song. So, all right, lifting of spirits. So, Baruch Hashem, Alhamdulillah, Hallelujah, Jayom, Shisha, Mado. So, anything else to share on this thing about Singapore before we get to the razzle dazzle? The beat goes on. Singapore continues to evolve. The culture, particularly with media being further available, young people being able to learn from other cultures, and additionally, Singapore is already well established and well known for being a multicultural society. It's a city, so it's a very much of an urban culture, and for better and for worse. And there's the shishi glamour lifestyle, and then there's like the plain hawker get some food lifestyle. If for those who want to have a car, cars I think cost like 10 times as much, something like that, or maybe cars cost twice as much as they would other places. However, that's only half of it. Actually, it's less than half of it, because to get a car is one thing, but then to get a car license, a driver's license to drive the car, the license costs 10 times as much as the car does. So again, strong classism. Meanwhile, plenty of public transportation. Cabs are available. I think those are expensive. So there's still ways of getting around. And again, it's a social type of a lot of the social policy in terms of health, education, safety, um, um, caring for vulnerable within society and otherwise. So within that type of culture, there's easier. It's generally uh, easier to have some type of um, relationship with neighbors and reconciliation with kinfolk who are different from oneself. So um, that is some of the general experience of Singapore as a multicultural society, and then the Eurasians of Singapore as a distinct group, as a distinct community for many generations, for hundreds of years within Singapore. Uh, so with that being said, I'll wrap it up with the razzle dazzle. Oh, it's razzle dazzle. Oh, it's how, let's build it up further. Oh, it's fantastic. It's awesome. It's beautiful. Wow. Okay. Anyway, all right. So this is actually a song, and I'm uncertain if this is going to get blocked for copyright proclamations. So we're just going to share the story and see how it goes. The video is actually unlisted intentionally initially, God willing. So don't know how much that factors into it either. But anyway, here's the story. So about 20 years ago, actually, thereabouts, I find out about a music company, a music like label um, that provides quote unquote world music. Now, the term world music for many people is cringe because people get ideas of like just fake plastic aesthetics of culture that are essentially exploitational, either self-exploitational or appropriation or otherwise. And so we get that. But at the same time, particularly 20 years ago, there's little less in terms of um, knowing where to go to find music, authentic music and otherwise. So Putumayo Music has this collection of albums that tend to be regional specific, tend to be even just like specific, specific, specific according to a nation or a region, Africa, Asia, different countries within each, Europe, Middle East, native areas, native lands of this hemisphere. So South Asia, East Asia, and otherwise. And hundreds at this point, hundreds of albums and from artists from each of these locations. So there is a certain authenticity amidst all the legitimate scrutiny and otherwise. So all that being said, I'm trying to think of what I can say positive, like categorically positive about Putumayo, or whether am wanted to do so. Putumayo provides a lot of beneficial music. It provides a lot of beneficial introductions to legendary musicians from different cultures. So that's one of the benefits that Putumayo does, and that's what I learned from considerably again over 20 years ago. Putumayo also does get involved in some of like appropriation kind of type stuff, and it has to sell stuff, and so that's what it's catering to. It caters primarily to a very Eurocentric Western audience that buys music, and so the song selections and additionally tend to be very cheery and this and the other. So for people who like are cultural aficionados and listen to it or hear it or whatever, they might be thinking, oh, that's like the gaslight. It's like cultural gaslighting. So there's a certain legitimacy within that. But again, that being said, particularly as a learning tool and as a learning process or whatever, being introduced to musicians, being introduced to genres of music, and additionally, it's very beneficial. Putumayo has a lot of albums in that respect. Um, and the musicians do come from those specific locations. Some of the musicians are very well known. Some of the musicians are comparatively low key or otherwise. There's another group called Playing for Change, which has a different kind of niche in terms of working with street musicians. But anyways, that's who we listened to initially over 20 years ago, thereabouts. Now, one of the things I will say about like that's challenging concerning Putumayo, and this is for many years. Don't know what the status is at this moment, but one of the concerns is that Putumayo, at least a number of years ago, has very few selections coming specifically from East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, even Vietnam, Thailand, and otherwise. And we recognize that's not by accident, and that there's, I mean, Putumayo has like 20 different albums, probably actually like 50 or 100 albums just coming out of India. And it becomes so nuanced. And yes, there is that market demand, and additionally, but it gets into like very distinct, detailed like genres within different cultures, Celtic tides, and drums of the Middle East. That's a little bit of, I'm kind of exaggerating that particular album, but it gives that very specific. Meanwhile, like just one particular album about music from China or music from Japan, not available. Um, there are compilation albums from South Asia and from other locations as well. And then there are like there are compilation albums of like all of Asia. There's like an Asian groove that has predominantly South Asian, and then it might have like one track from like Indonesia, and that's about as readily available as selections from East Asia are in the general offerings of Putumayo. I bring this up with the kinfolk at Putumayo, and this is all relevant. This is actually going to the point, and this is leading into the razzle dazzle. So, I talked to the kinfolk at many years ago at Putumayo. I'd be like, "Yo, where's the East Asian culture? Where's the East Asian representation?" And Brethren was like, "Yo, we got some." I'm like, "Come on, Brethren, let's be honest." I'm like, I was actually in the middle of purchasing things at that moment, like a large list of CDs. So this was like, I've got a right to say something, whatever. Um, we have to get off that mindset too of just because somebody buys something that gives them sanctions to say anything. That ain't it. It's just a legitimate thing, and there's motivation for kinfolk to listen. So did I just like nullify that statement by double talk? Blah blah. Anyways, so the brethren at first wanted to say like, "Yeah, we got albums, we got this, that, and the other." And there was one album that was specifically East Asian. That was I think actually there might have been two. There might have been two albums, and that was it. One was a children's playground kind of music, and then the other one was like a lullabies, children's lullabies. So those were the only two selections. Compared to like again, like I said, and this is not hating any other group or whatever, but just like the Middle East had like 20, 30, 40, 50 selections. India has 50 selections. Different parts of Africa have like 50 selections. Europe, similarly, all different like 20 types of salsa, and otherwise, all the different types of drinks from Brazil specifically, the land of the Guarani, and two albums. Those the only two albums. Even like the Asian Groove, hardly having any tracks from East Asia. So, here we go. We're getting there now. All that being said, and actually, the brethren were very beautiful and responsive, talking with me directly over the phone when people used to talk on the phone back in the day. And he sends me a list, the off menu, the list off menu, whatever, of like even further tracks like off that are off printing or whatever that were still available from the inventory of things that they weren't offering on the website at that moment. And so he sent me the list of like all these other albums. And so from that, there was a couple additional ones that I find. One is music from the Tea Lands or something like that. So again, Tea Lands, what does that mean? But on that album, there are a number of tracks that are from East Asia. And I think there was one other one. So we continue on to facilitate the acquisition of those two additional CDs. And on one of those CDs, there is the track that I'm about to share, God willing. And after all that, I should remember the name of it, shouldn't I? I've been listening to it for nearly 20 years. It is called Kong Mandor. And so, actually, to be honest, the details of it, and additionally, I know less about. What I do know is that it's a melodic tune. It's like an easygoing, kind of like just like gentle breezy kind of thing. and so it is a regular fixture within many of my playlists for many years at this point. And as is the case with much of the personal or the multiculturalism that I experience here, it becomes challenging because we know of few other people who know the same songs that we do. We listen to songs from around the world that are popular amongst many other people around the world, but in terms of here in Ohio, cats ain't listening to this stuff, too tough. So when we hear something we enjoy and we want to talk with somebody about it, and like just like we talk about music, less available. And if it might be, if I meet somebody who's a student or whatever, and I say, oh yeah, do you know about so and so? Oh yeah, fantastic. And then I'll say, well, what about so and so from this place? And they'll, nope. So, anyways, that's just the scene right here. One of the challenges. Oh, so sad. But anyways, all that being said, sad, see, so. Kang Mang Dur is one of these songs. Of just like being mellow, it's just a chill song or whatever. It's kind of like, it's just, again, it sounds like a child song. So it's very plain and simple, but it's like, it's very soothing. It's just very calming. And again, when it's included within a playlist of other songs of similar and complementary nature, it has it's a beautiful thing. That's frustrating because there are a few people that I can talk with about this song. So, anyways, and there are many songs like that, musicians and concerts and otherwise. So, all that being said, what I'm gonna do here, right here, right here, is play a segment of that song, Razzle Dazzle. That might cost the posting of this joint. All right, so this is again, Kang Mang Dur. Even the playing of it, I'm without the details about the musicians and otherwise. And I try to be fastidious about that, but at the moment it's unavailable. So I'm just gonna play the song, just a part of it, just to get a sense of the tune. All right, so that's the song. It goes on, but that's the gist of it. And so I listened to that for going on 20 years at this point. Um, and I can probably count on my hand the number of people that I know in life, directly, personally, who also know that song. What up? Now, if you heard it, if it plays, if this video is still up, are you impressed? Is it like, okay, whatever? Okay, that's fine. To each his own, different strokes, and all that stuff. Now, that's not the end of the story, though. Because just in the past year, there is another discovery. So first, I began by saying, oh, I'm learning this joint. Are we going to be multimedia? Proper multimedia. Oh, it's been a long time since I practiced. Like weeks, months, maybe, generally speaking. Wheezies. Let's do some type of representation here. Practice. We're just gonna leave it like that. It's gonna clean it up the best right there. So I actually do learn some songs, one of which is Kong Mang Dur, at least the beginning melody on this joint. It's been a while since I practiced, like I said. Yo, we gotta practice and keep practice. That goes for everything in life: language, eating, all things. We gotta keep practice if we want to keep it up. So, anyways, this is one of the instruments that I'm learning. Slowly, surely, Jill Scott. Um, so, I got a nice DZ lesson from kinfolk here as well. Um, Now, Dietze. Now, all that being said, point here is this. About a year ago, when I'm looking for lessons or examples of the kinfolk playing Dietze online, I find nothing less than the Singaporean Dietze Society. And it just so happens that at that moment, again, about a year ago, maybe been 2 years ago now, amidst the arrival of the Lunar New Year, the Singapore Dietze Society completes a project of recordings of members of the society playing the Dietze and wishing people a Happy New Year. So, one of those recordings, many fantastic recordings, beautiful kinfolk sharing beautiful music in those recordings, such riches, tremendous riches. That's where we at today. And we're talking about world music. That's where we at. Traditional music of the world, finding the local musicians who are representing and continuing on the culture. That's the riches. We're like, all right. Anyways, so the Singapore Dietze Society provides a very generous gift in sharing these recordings, and one of those recordings includes a quartet of young brethren. And it appears that three of the brethren are Chinese, perhaps Han, and one of the brethren is Malay. Haha, how about that? We got multiculturalism going on. And so there's a video. All the recordings are video recordings, so it's a video recording of the actual music being played, which is very valuable to see the instrumentation, to see how it's played, and additionally. And so in this recording, I'm only going to play the audio because the tech skills. I don't do editing too tough on these joints. And again, this is a test run for the deep dives, the mixed heritage, world history deep dive. So the editing proclivities at the moment are going to be very modest. So we're just getting audio right now. But there is a video to this, and it is beneficial to see the video because all the sounds are coming either from musical instruments or the musicians themselves. So there's no recordings, there's no digital overdubs or anything else like that. This is all like acoustic. Well, kind of, sort of. It's recorded, but it's recorded from acoustic. The sounds of the sea, the birds, and all that. What up? So two brethren on the Dietze, one brethren on percussions, which includes either looks like probably the xylophone as well as drums, and then the other brethren, who's Malay, is also on percussions, which includes what some kinfolk might see or whatever as a rain stick, but it's a different type of device, but then also some hand drums as well. So anyways, those are the four brethren who are recording this music, and I'm just going to play it, let it speak for itself, and let the relationship share itself.
大家好，我是杰胜，
我是维良，
我是崇伟，我是 Firdaus。
祝贺新加坡笛子学会成立20周年。
So that is the recording. Again, it's the Singapore Dizi Society, Singapore. They didn't give the credits for the musicians, or maybe they do, and it's just in Chinese, and I've yet to translate in an effective way. That's an accent that I don't practice that often. So, anyways, if you look up the Singapore Dizi Society 20th anniversary, you can find the recordings, God willing. And this one again is the quartet of the Brethren, and so again, that's the mashup. It's a mashup of songs from what I observe, and one of those songs happened to be Kong Mong Dor. So when I heard that, again, I've been listening to this song for decades at this point, not knowing nobody else that knows it. And so when I'm looking at the society, just like listening to the recordings and studying, I'm like, hold up, I know that song. What? Y'all doing that song? Okay, it's not just me. There's a reason why Putumayo puts it on his album, so obviously it has some type of appeal. But anyway, so when we get that affirmation, like, yo, that's just a small nugget. It's a small nugget. But at the same time, yo. Anyway, so that's the joint. And again, particularly if you listen to the end of it, you can see the instruments, like that sound that waves on the ground, on the shore sound. The Brendan actually has it looks like a hand drum, but maybe like small pebbles or something like that, or something similar that he just moves around to make it sound like the waves. And then the Brethren do their own whistles to make it sound like birds. And that flourish that the Brethren, if you look at it, he's wearing the dark yellow joint. He does the flourish on the lower tone Dizi to introduce the Kong Mandur part of the mashup or the medley. Yo, he does that note, or he does that flourish for a long time. And yo, playing a wind instrument, it's not the easiest of things, because yo, the breath, you got to work on that breath. So, but I mean, just in terms of breathing and being able to an extended breath, it's not just a matter of like, I'm accustomed to piano and drum. So like to hold a note and play it for like 20 seconds nonstop. I'm sure there's techniques for saxophonists and trumpet players, and additionally to like get some air. I saw a brother playing like for a Swange in Igbo land in Nigeria. In a recording, he does this one note on the horn instrument, a traditional African horn instrument that sounds actually very much like a Chinese horn, distinctive sound, Chinese Indian. But he holds it for like 30-60 seconds, and it seems as though it's like a bagpipe type of situation where he's able to like get some air in whilst the note is still going, and the mechanics, it's wondrous. So, but this brethren, from my experience playing these like this, like it's just a matter of like practice and being able to do breathing exercises to be able to do that flourish. And it's one thing to be able to breathe and keep that breath going long, but to keep it strong, to get that note, that sound to be constant, and then continuing on into the next sequence. Yo, impressive from a very, very novice practitioner. How many times are we gonna do this? Anyway, all right. So that's part of it. Now, one thing about the drum also, it's interesting hearing again. I'm relearning the drum. It done been taken from my ancestors. That's no play and that's no joke. Cut and hands cut off. To this day, things are done through different ways, but still, it hasn't been returned too tough to brethren on this continent. The drum I'm speaking of. I'll bring it out whilst I speak of it. I thought we were talking about Eurasian, and here's a djembe. It's multiculturalism. Let's get a sound on this. Anyway, point here is this. When listening to the drum, even I study the drum at this point considerably when when I have availability. One things we can recognize, people talk about it very easily. Drum is like one of the first instruments kinfolk learned. Silence is probably up there. But drum, it's the heartbeat. We learned that before we were even born. We learned the drum. How about that? That's facts. Everybody, one way or another, to this day, and even where science is today. So we learn about that, the heartbeat, and it brings us back to that experience. That's part of the power and the strength of the drum. Now, that being said, obviously there are all different types of ways, all different types of drums, and all different types of ways of playing the drum. We talk about traditional drumming, again, from Africa, West Africa particularly, but also East Asia, India, native drumming, and additionally. What we observe, and what I observe in my studies, is that we can see animals. And the different stylings of drumming, like when we listen to this drumming here of the Singaporean brethren with the Dizi Society, there's a very distinct East Asian Chinese drum, and they're two different sounds. One is like a horse, trotting, or not trotting, trotting, like that, and then there's like the further active drumming, and this is a lot with a lot of Chinese music, but that and that sounds like galloping horses. So we hear that. Now, when listening to a number of African like that, there's a brethren whose name is Kanate, who's an African drum master I listen to, and this is where like it hits me a number of years ago when listening to him. Like he tells a story just through the drum, and that's part of African history. That's part of African culture. So I mean, music is that all around the world, but particularly the drum. Stories just through the drumming, and so this I could hear it so clearly. This one time I was listening to this track. It's a performance that the brethren does with other brethren on stage, and I listened to it for years and years, and just kind of I'll cultivate myself generally. Now he's coming from Senegal, the Wolof, and additionally, so it's somewhat different stylings from Twi, Ashanti, Igbo, Yoruba, and otherwise. However, like it's there's still like learn a lesson. And so here I listen because of that, or particularly for that. And then one occasion I'm listening to it, and all of a sudden, like I could just see it plain as day. It's like, I won't liken it to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like reading all of a sudden, but it was like that kind of like, yo, I've been listening to this the whole time, and all of a sudden it just hit me. When I heard his playing, and it's just him playing it by himself. He does a thing where he does it by himself, and then eventually there's accompaniment that comes in an orchestrated kind of way. But when he's doing it by himself, I could hear what he's playing. Now, this might be subject to interpretation or whatever else, but literally I could see a goat, like a goat, learning to walk and prance around, and additionally, by the way he was playing the drum. And at first, it was like a cacophony of hooves on the earth, just all around or whatever. But then eventually, there's like the clearness of just a young goat, as goats do, just jumping around or whatever, playing around. I could hear that through the drum rhythm that he was sharing. And then when hearing that, he brings in other animals as well by the different rhythms that he plays on the drum. And when everybody else joins in, again, I was just like, wow. Not a word was spoken, and I just got that whole thing just from that. And again, it's remembering, because that's where we come from, kinfolk of African ancestry. And that's one of the things that was intentionally punished for having a literacy of, not even to this day. So I thank the Most High for hearing it, and again, encouraged to learn and study further. So again, now that hearing that, I can hear kinfolk when playing from Africa, hearing the hooves of what it's like, because I've been in the nature reserves where the animals run wild, where they run not wild, free, and I remember like what it feels like to feel the hooves of zebra on the ground, on the dry ground in Botswana and Namibia. Am I pushing it that way? There's probably a reserve in Namibia. It was dry season, so I remember like hearing the hooves. So those things that one hears on National Geographic, maybe kind of sort of, like I know what that feels like, lightweight. And again, all thanks and praise the Most High. And then when I hear the drum, I'm like, yo, okay, I see. Now when I hear that, and I hear like the drumming from India, that distinct thing, I see the elephants. I feel like that wet, warm, like hot air, and the big ear elephants just coming in, and it's like, come on, y'all. It's so obvious and so beautiful. And then again, the trotting hooves from the Chinese rhythms, and then the gap from the dry lands and grasslands and further of China. So and then it translates into the dance. Like again, like watching Tibetan dances. With the flowing like birds in the prairies in the Tibetan plateau. It's like so natural. And then like going back to native heritage, the two step, listening and watching Lumi, giving the calls from the rainforest of the west coast of this continent, the rain, shared through the wardrobe, and the trees. So, anyways, music is an awesome thing, and it's a beautiful and profound way to connect. And so, it has a literacy all of its own that children probably have much further proclivity and fluency within. And we give all thanks and praise. We give all thanks and praise the Most High. So that's the joint for today. And we talked somewhat about Eurasians of Singapore. Even talked somewhat favorably and positive and affirmationally about Eurasians of Singapore. I'm trying to think of like anything like of like a cheery positive note. It's a very interesting culture, and this is going a little bit away from the proper like group of Eurasian Society of Singapore or Singaporean Eurasians, and just like listening to the Singaporean culture, because there are a lot of media groups, a lot of media projects on YouTube. From Singaporean youth, and hearing like what Singaporean youth are talking about. I listened to that for a number of years, for a while. It's been a while since because I'm off the internet, generally speaking, so I don't watch things as much as I used to. But listening to kinfolk talk about Singaporean culture, about what the youth think about and what the youth are doing, the jokes, the vulgarities, the redemptive empathy, and further. There's one can call it very Western, and that there might be a bias in that respect in terms of what's being presented and then what's being shared, particularly all the way over here to the West. But at the same time, things are getting beyond just a notion of being Western, because things are becoming further just like internet culture, and beyond specific attributability or exclusive attributability. How about that? Say that 5 times fast. Not too cuff or tough. Attributability. Maybe not fast enough, but it's done. To the world culture. And a world culture that's feeding itself from coast to coast, from continent to continent, hemisphere to hemisphere, class to class, varna to varna, ethnicity to ethnicity, religion to religion, and otherwise. So, and the reason why I say it is because many of the kinfolk are mixed, are Eurasian, and a lot of the topics that the kinfolk address involve specifically the mixed heritage experience. Whether the kinfolk who are mixed heritage featured in those interviews and programs are part of the Eurasian Society properly or otherwise, I know less about. I know less about the details about that. I do know that many of the kinfolk who are featured in that are actually also mixed Malay, and again that factors into those distinctions. And again, the Eurasians of Singapore are not just a specific kind of, are not just a general mixed heritage. It's a specific, unique cultural and custom and rituals. It has certain linguistic implications, Again, there's a strong Eurocentric kind of Christian, particularly with Christmas, foundational kind of presumption or like a commonality, and it's interesting phenomenon of how that it's a distinct characteristic from the quote unquote norm or the mainstream of Singaporean society, which is Chinese Han. So it's distinct from that, but and perhaps because of that distinctiveness, it acts as an effective anchor for all the different types of Eurasian experiences, to kind of just like circle around that, because it has its own formidability of its own and its own influence and geopolitical advantages. So all the different Eurasian groups kind of migrating in like circumambulating or whatever. I'm trying to think of the right word and get a little bit late now. We're only almost 2 hours into this joint. But just moving around that kind of anchor as a way of having some kind of like affirmational identity that is, or experience and heritage that is distinct from just the presumption of Han. And even if kinfolk aren't necessarily the most active in terms of being a Christian practitioner or otherwise, culturally it's a way of having a tangible, geopolitically advantageous identifying factor that connects other Eurasians with each other, even if one is from Portugal and one is from the Netherlands, one is from Britain. There's still that kind of general kind of cosmopolitan kind of connector, and there's in that distinction from the mainstream, there's a further liberty of like being one's own self. And so there's a distinct history, there's distinct personages and legends within the Eurasian experience that factors into it as well. I mentioned the Jingli dance, the line dance, and that becomes a cultural trait to share with the rest of Singapore, of a distinct Eurasian experience that people can learn. There's a video I've seen about a sister in hijab sitting in the audience watching the Jingli and seeing people learn how to do that line dance. Now again, where that levels in terms of haram and otherwise, that's going to differ on the imam we ask or otherwise. But anyways, point is like it's a something that the mixed community, the mixed heritage community, the Eurasian community in Singapore brings to the table of Singaporean culture, that's distinct and also advantageous for the rest of Singapore to have some literacy concerning. And again, there's institutional framework within the Eurasian society. There's the museum, and then the museum is a center of culture. It's an activity, a center of activity, gathering, and otherwise. So there's a formidable staying power of the Eurasian community within Singapore, and with the diplomatic acculturations and navigations of convention. So I share that entire joint without saying the name of any one particular specific Eurasian kinfolk. Wada. Yes. Not intentionally, but again, it's according to the knowledge that I have. What I can provide is that, well, nah, I'm just going to leave it at that. So I try to conclude on a very positive and high-spirited note, but this intrinsic self-deprecation, every time I think I'm out, it keeps calling me back in. So anyways, that being said, we give thanks and praise to the Most High for the energy and the information and the inclination and the perspiration. Blessed love and peace. Rastafari.